Robert Keller stared out the window of his modest apartment, watching the rain fall over the city's skyline. His phone rang for the third time that morning. He knew who it was, the board of directors at Keller Industries, his brother's company. "Mr. Keller, we need you to come in immediately," said the stern voice of Janet Morris, the head of the board. "Your brother Marcus has suffered a serious heart attack." Robert hadn't spoken to his billionaire brother in nearly 30 years. Their last conversation ended with slammed doors and harsh words that couldn't be taken back. But now, Marcus lay in a hospital bed, and his empire needed leadership. "I'll be there in an hour," Robert replied, already reaching for his only suit. The Keller Industries headquarters stood 70 stories tall in the center of downtown, a glass and steel monument to Marcus Keller's success. Robert felt small as he walked through the grand lobby, past the giant portrait of his brother that hung behind the reception desk. "Mr. Keller, this way please," a young assistant guided him to the elevator. "The board is waiting in the main conference room." 10 serious faces looked up as Robert entered. Some he recognized from business news, others were complete strangers. At the head of the table sat Janet Morris, her gray hair pulled back tightly. "Robert, thank you for coming on such short notice," she began. "As you know, your brother's condition is critical. The doctors are not sure if he will recover." Robert nodded, uncomfortable with the sudden concern for a brother he hadn't seen in decades. "What you don't know," Janet continued, "is that Keller Industries is in serious trouble. Marcus has been hiding financial problems from the board and shareholders for years." She slid a folder across the table. Robert opened it to find balance sheets covered in red. "We're losing money. A lot of money," said a balding man who introduced himself as the chief financial officer. "The company appears successful on the outside, but inside, we're nearly bankrupt." Robert flipped through the pages, his eyes widening. How did this happen? Bad investments, risky ventures, and... Janet paused, looking uncomfortable. "Your nephew Philip's spending habits." Robert had never met his nephew. Philip was born after the brothers' falling out, and Robert only knew him from occasional newspaper photos showing a young man with expensive tastes at high society events. "Marcus named you as interim CEO in case of emergency," Janet explained. "It's in the company bylaws, updated 5 years ago. We were all surprised." Robert nearly laughed. "Me, I've been running a small consulting firm for decades. I'm not prepared to lead a global corporation." "You have something your nephew doesn't," said an older board member. "Business sense and integrity. Philip has been groomed as the heir, but he's..." The man trailed off. "He's driving this company into the ground," Janet finished bluntly. "We need someone from the Keller family who can make hard decisions. The banks are watching. The employees are nervous. We have 3 months before we need to start massive layoffs." As if on cue, the conference room door burst open. A tall young man in a designer suit stormed in, his face flushed with anger. "What is this emergency meeting? And who is he?" The young man pointed at Robert. "Philip, this is your uncle Robert," Janet said calmly. "Your father's brother." Philip Keller's eyes narrowed. "The uncle who abandoned the family? What's he doing here?" Robert stood slowly, extending his hand. "I'm sorry about your father. I hope he recovers soon." Philip ignored the outstretched hand. "He will. And when he does, he won't be happy to find you trying to take over his company." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Robert realized this was only the beginning of what would become the most difficult challenge of his life. 2. The next morning, Robert arrived at Keller Industries at 7:00 a.m. He wanted to understand the company's operations before most employees arrived. The security guard looked surprised to see a Keller so early, but gave him access to the executive floor without question. Robert spent 2 hours reviewing financial reports. The situation was worse than he had imagined. The company was losing $2 million every day. As he studied the documents, he heard a commotion in the hallway. "I don't care what time the meeting was scheduled. I'm here now, so they can wait for me." Philip's voice echoed through the corridor. The conference room door swung open. Philip walked in wearing expensive clothes that looked like he had worn them the night before. He smelled of expensive cologne and last night's drinks. "Well, if it isn't Uncle Robert, already making himself comfortable in my father's office," Philip said with a smirk. He dropped into a chair and put his feet on the table. "Good morning, Philip," Robert said calmly. I was hoping we could talk about the Thompson contract. It's losing money but could be salvaged if we renegotiate terms. Philip waved his hand dismissively. That's boring business stuff. The marketing team has this amazing idea for a company yacht. Great for entertaining clients. Robert took a deep breath. Philip, the company is in serious financial trouble. We need to focus on cutting costs, not buying yachts. You don't understand how this business works, Philip said, pulling out his phone and scrolling through messages. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money. That's what Dad always says. Is that why the company is nearly bankrupt? Robert asked quietly. Philip's head snapped up. What did you say? Before Robert could answer, Janet Morris entered with several board members. Good, you're both here, she said. We need to discuss the quarterly report before it goes public next week. The chief financial officer presented slides showing declining revenue in all major divisions. When he mentioned Philip's recent project, a luxury office renovation that cost $12 million, Philip interrupted. That investment improves our image. Clients expect Keller Industries to look successful, he argued. Clients expect Keller Industries to be successful, Robert corrected. And right now, we're not. Philip glared at his uncle. You've been here one day, and suddenly you're an expert. I've been working with my father for years. Janet exchanged looks with the other board members. Actually, Philip, your attendance records show you've been in the office an average of 6 hours per week for the past year. Philip's face turned red. I do a lot of business on the golf course. That's how deals are made. What deals exactly? Robert asked, flipping through a report. According to this, you haven't brought in a single new client in 3 years. The room fell silent. Philip stood up suddenly, knocking his chair backward. I don't have to listen to this. My father built this company from nothing. When he recovers, he'll throw you out. He pointed at Robert. And as for the rest of you, remember who signs your paychecks. After Philip stormed out, Robert turned to the board. I need to see all of Philip's projects and spending for the past 5 years. By afternoon, Robert had a clearer picture of the damage. Philip had spent hundreds of millions on failed ventures, personal expenses disguised as business costs, and vanity projects that brought no return. As Robert prepared to leave for the day, his assistant handed him a note. It was from the hospital. Marcus had regained consciousness and was asking for his son, not his brother. Robert sighed as he looked out at the city through the large windows of the executive office. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the skyscrapers. He had a feeling that the battle for Keller Industries was only beginning, and family ties would be tested in ways he had never imagined. 1 week into his role as interim CEO, Robert called an emergency meeting with the department heads. The company's financial situation was deteriorating faster than expected. Employees filled the large conference room, their faces tense with worry as Robert stood at the front. Thank you all for coming, Robert began. I won't waste time. Keller Industries is losing money at an alarming rate. We need immediate action to survive. He displayed a chart showing the company's downward trajectory. Many in the room gasped. But the quarterly reports showed profits, said Linda from marketing, confusion in her voice. Those reports were? Robert paused, choosing his words carefully, not entirely accurate. The room erupted in whispers. Robert raised his hand for silence. I'm implementing a recovery plan starting today. All non-essential projects are suspended. We're cutting travel budgets by 80%. The company jets will be sold, and unfortunately, we need to reduce staff by 15%. The mood in the room darkened. These were difficult measures. Robert knew they were necessary. I know this is hard news, he continued. But these steps will save thousands of other jobs. The cuts will start at the top, executive bonuses are cancelled, and my salary as interim CEO will be $1 until we're profitable again. Just as the group began to ask questions, the double doors burst open. Philip stormed in, followed by 2 men in expensive suits. Stop this meeting immediately, Philip shouted. You have no authority to make these decisions. Robert remained calm. Philip, we're in the middle of an important discussion. Perhaps we can talk afterward. No, we'll talk now. Philip turned to face the room. My father is recovering, and he does not approve of these extreme measures. These are his advisors. He gestured to the men beside him. One of the men stepped forward. I'm Richard Wong, Mr. Marcus Keller's personal attorney. Mr. Keller has expressed concern about the direction of the company under Robert's leadership. Janet Morris stood up from her seat at the table. Richard, as you know, the board approved Robert's appointment and his recovery plan. Marcus is still medically unfit to make business decisions. My father is perfectly capable. Philip shouted. He's just weak from his heart attack. He built this company, and he doesn't want it dismantled by his failed brother. The room fell silent at the personal attack. Robert took a deep breath. The company isn't being dismantled, Philip. It's being saved from collapse. Your father hid the true financial situation from everyone, including you. Philip laughed bitterly. That's ridiculous. We just opened new offices in Singapore last month. With borrowed money we can't repay, Robert replied. He turned to the department heads. The Singapore expansion is one of the projects we have to postpone. That's my project. Philip's face turned red with anger. I worked on that deal for months. The numbers don't add up, Philip. It would cost us $50 million we don't have. Marcus's attorney cleared his throat. Nevertheless, we're here to inform you that Marcus wishes his son to take over as interim CEO effective immediately. Janet stood up again. That's not possible without board approval, and the board stands with Robert's plan. Philip pointed at his uncle, his hand shaking with rage. You think you can walk in here after 30 years and take over? My father will never allow it. This company belongs to the Kellers, the real Kellers. Philip, Robert said softly, I am a Keller. And right now, my only concern is saving this company, your father's legacy, from bankruptcy. The tension in the room was unbearable. Department heads shifted uncomfortably in their seats, uncertain about who was really in charge. This isn't over, Philip said through clenched teeth. He stormed out with his lawyers following close behind. Robert turned back to the anxious faces in the room. I apologize for that interruption. Now, let's continue with our recovery plan. Together, we can turn this company around. As the meeting resumed, Robert knew that saving Keller Industries wouldn't just require fixing its finances. He would need to heal a family broken by pride, jealousy, and 30 years of silence. 2 weeks later, Robert sat in his temporary office reviewing the first results of his recovery plan. Though small, the numbers showed improvement. The company had reduced its daily losses from $2 million to $1.2 million. It wasn't profitability yet, but it was progress. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Janet Morris, looking more worried than usual. Robert, we have a situation, she said, closing the door behind her. Marcus has been released from the hospital. He's at home recovering, but Philip has been meeting with him daily. Robert nodded. He had expected this. And Philip convinced Marcus to sign some papers. He's using his father's power of attorney to try to remove you and reverse your cost-cutting measures. Robert set down his pen. Can he do that legally? Not without board approval, Janet said, but he's telling employees and partners that you'll be gone by the end of the week. It's creating confusion and panic. Before Robert could respond, his assistant rushed in without knocking. Mr. Keller, you need to see this, she said, handing him a tablet. On the screen was an email sent to all employees from Philip's account. Robert read it aloud. Effective immediately, all cost-cutting measures implemented by Robert Keller are suspended. The Singapore expansion will continue as planned. Regular operations will resume under my direction as the new CEO, with my father's full support. You can't do this, Janet said. The board hasn't approved any change in leadership. Robert's phone began ringing. It was the head of the legal department. Sir, Philip Keller is in the building with security guards, trying to access the secure financial servers. Should we stop him? Yes, Robert said firmly. And call building security to escort him to my office. It's time we had a proper conversation. 20 minutes later, Philip was brought to Robert's office. His face was red with anger as the security guards left them alone. You have no right to block me, Philip shouted. This is my father's company. Sit down, Philip, Robert said calmly. Please. Surprisingly, Philip complied, dropping into the chair across from Robert's desk. I've been reviewing the company finances very carefully, Robert began, including your personal expenses charged to the company account. Philip shifted uncomfortably. So, I'm a Keller. The company belongs to my family. It belongs to its shareholders, Robert corrected him. And they wouldn't be happy to learn about your private jet trips to Las Vegas charged as client meetings when there were no clients present. You're spying on me? Philip's voice rose again. No, I'm doing my job as CEO, which includes this. Robert slid a folder across the desk. Financial records showing $30 million transferred from Keller Industries to a private account in your name over the past 3 years. Philip's face went pale. Those were approved expenses. Approved by whom? Not the board. Not the financial department. Robert leaned forward. Philip, this is embezzlement. My father knew about those transfers. Philip stood up, knocking his chair backward. He approved everything. Did he know about Horizon Holdings? Robert asked quietly. Philip froze. What? Horizon Holdings, the shell company you created last year. The one that's been buying up small properties around our main factory at inflated prices. Properties that Keller Industries mysteriously decided it suddenly needed. The color drained from Philip's face. How did you? I'm good at my job, Philip. And right now, my job is to save this company, even if that means saving it from you. Robert stood and walked around the desk. I didn't want this to happen, but you've left me no choice. As of today, you're suspended from all positions at Keller Industries pending a full investigation. You can't do this. I'm a Keller, Philip shouted. So am I, Robert replied calmly. And unlike you, I understand that this name comes with responsibility, not just privilege. Philip's hands curled into fists. My father will never allow this. Your father is the reason I'm here, Robert said. And when he's well enough to understand what you've done, I think he'll agree it was necessary. As security arrived to escort Philip from the building, Robert felt no satisfaction, only sadness for his brother's son and the painful family conversation that would inevitably follow. The news of Philip's removal spread through Keller Industries like wildfire. By afternoon, it had reached the financial news networks. Robert watched from his office as reporters gathered outside the building, hungry for details about the family drama unfolding inside the corporate giant. His phone rang. It was his mother, Eleanor Keller, now 85 years old and living in a retirement community in Florida. Robert, what have you done? Her voice trembled with emotion. Marcus called me. He can barely speak. He's so upset. Robert closed his eyes. He hadn't spoken to his mother in years either, though their relationship wasn't as broken as the one with his brother. Mom, it's complicated. The company was in trouble, and Philip was making it worse. He's your nephew, Robert. Your own blood. Eleanor's voice cracked. And now the whole world is watching this family tear itself apart. I didn't want it to become public, Robert explained, but Philip left me no choice. He was stealing from the company. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, your brother wants to see you. Today. Robert's heart pounded. Marcus is willing to talk to me. He's furious, but yes, this is tearing him apart, Robert. First his heart attack, now this scandal. Please, for the family's sake, go see him. After hanging up, Robert canceled his afternoon meetings and drove to Marcus's mansion in the exclusive Highland Park neighborhood. The house was enormous, a 20,000-square-foot monument to success with perfectly manicured gardens and a gate guarded by private security. The housekeeper led Robert through marble hallways to a sunroom at the back of the house. There, propped up on pillows on a large sofa, was Marcus Keller. Robert barely recognized his older brother. Once robust and commanding, Marcus now looked thin and pale, his face drawn with illness and stress. So, the prodigal brother returns, Marcus said, his voice weak but still carrying the sharp edge Robert remembered. Hello, Marcus. You look better than I expected. Don't lie to me. I look like death. Marcus gestured to a chair. Sit down. Let's talk about how you're destroying everything I built. Robert sat across from his brother. I'm trying to save it, actually. By humiliating my son. I'm making us look like fools in front of the entire business world. Marcus's face flushed with anger, and he coughed violently. Take it easy, Marcus, Robert said with genuine concern. Your heart. Don't pretend you care about my heart now. Where have you been for 30 years, Robert? 30 years. The pain in Marcus's voice made Robert flinch. I stayed away because you made it clear I wasn't welcome. And now you swoop in and take everything from my son? Robert leaned forward. Philip was stealing millions, Marcus. He created fake companies to funnel money out of Keller Industries. He was driving your company into bankruptcy. That's a lie, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. It's all documented. The board has seen the evidence. That's why they support my decision. Marcus turned to look out the window at his expansive gardens. He's my only child, Robert. My legacy. The company is your legacy too, Robert said gently. And right now, it's in danger. A tear slipped down Marcus's cheek, surprising Robert. He had never seen his powerful brother cry before. What would you have done if it was your son? Marcus asked. The question hung in the air between them. Robert had no children of his own, another casualty of his single-minded focus on his small business after leaving Keller Industries. I would want someone to tell me the truth, Robert finally answered, even if it hurt. Marcus closed his eyes, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. Philip was always difficult, but I never thought he would steal. People do desperate things when they feel entitled to success without earning it, Robert said. Marcus looked at his brother with a mixture of anger and exhaustion. Get out, Robert. I need to think. As Robert left the mansion, he felt the weight of 30 years of family history on his shoulders. Saving the company might be possible, but healing the family wounds seemed like a much harder task. 3 weeks after his confrontation with Marcus, Robert worked late into the evening. The company's situation was improving, but they weren't out of danger yet. As he reviewed documents from the legal department, a name caught his eye: Keller Solar Systems. He frowned. The file was dated 1986, before his falling out with Marcus. Robert remembered Keller Solar Systems well. It had been his idea, his passion project, his potential breakthrough. But Marcus had dismissed it as impractical and expensive. The project had died when Robert left the company. Or so he thought. Robert opened the file and began reading. His heart raced as he flipped through page after page. 6 months after he had left Keller Industries, Marcus had quietly revived the solar project under a different department. The technology Robert had developed became the foundation for what was now the company's most profitable division. He stole my idea, Robert whispered to the empty office. Curious, he searched for more files from that period. In the digital archives, he found a folder marked Personal NK. It required a password. On a hunch, Robert typed in Eleanor 1940, their mother's name and birth year, which Marcus used for everything important. The folder opened, revealing hundreds of documents. One subfolder was labeled simply Robert. Inside were emails, letters, and memos spanning 30 years, all about him. Robert clicked on a recent email, dated just 1 year ago. It was from Marcus to his personal lawyer. Richard, as discussed, I've updated my will. In the event of my death, my brother Robert is to assume control of Keller Industries. I know this will upset Philip, but he's not ready and may never be. Robert was always the business genius. I just took his ideas and ran with them. It's time to make things right. This stays between us until necessary. Robert sat back, stunned. Marcus had planned to give him the company. After all these years? He opened more documents. There were surveillance reports. Marcus had been keeping tabs on Robert's small consulting firm for decades. There were notes about Robert's achievements, clippings of small articles when his business won awards. Most surprisingly, there were unsent letters, dozens of them. Robert opened one from 1995. Dear Robert, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Pride keeps me from sending it. But I need to write down that I was wrong. The solar technology was brilliant. You were right. I took your idea because I couldn't stand that you might succeed without me. The guilt has eaten at me for years. Robert read letter after letter, each one revealing more of his brother's regret and admiration. In the last one, dated just before his heart attack, Marcus had written, Robert, I'm not well. The doctors say my heart is failing. I lived with the shame of what I did to you for too long. You deserve better from your brother. I've arranged for you to take over if anything happens to me. Philip will fight it. He thinks he deserves everything without working for it. He reminds me too much of myself at his worst. Maybe you can teach him what I never could. The office door opened, startling Robert. It was Janet Morris. Still working? She asked, then noticed his expression. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "In a way I have," Robert replied. He gestured to the screen. "Did you know about this? About Marcus making me his successor in his will?" Janet nodded slowly. "Only a few of us knew. He swore us to secrecy. He said he had a debt to repay to you." "He stole my solar technology," Robert said, his voice hollow. "The technology that saved this company." "Yes," Janet said simply. "He did. And he regretted it every day since." Robert stared at the screen, at 30 years of his brother's secret guilt and regret. "He never told Philip about the succession plan," Janet continued. "He was waiting for the right time. Then he had the heart attack." Robert closed the laptop slowly. All these years, he had believed his brother hated him. The truth was far more complicated and painful. "What will you do now?" Janet asked. Robert looked out at the city lights. "First, I'm going to save this company. Then I think it's time for the Keller family to have some honest conversations." 3 months after taking control of Keller Industries, Robert stood at the podium during the quarterly shareholders meeting. The large conference room was packed with investors, board members, and financial reporters. All eyes were on him as he prepared to announce the results of his recovery plan. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert began, "when I stepped into this role, Keller Industries was losing over $2 million every day. Today, I'm pleased to announce that for the first time in 2 years, we are profitable again." The room erupted in applause. Robert waited for the noise to die down before continuing. "This didn't happen because of financial tricks or accounting games. It happened because we made difficult decisions and followed through on them. We cut unnecessary expenses, renegotiated unfavorable contracts, and focused on what this company has always done best: innovation." On the screen behind him, graphs showed the company's remarkable turnaround. Stock prices had climbed 30% in just 3 months. "But this is only the beginning," Robert continued. "Keller Industries isn't just surviving now, we're positioned to grow again." As Robert finished his presentation, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Financial reporters rushed to file their stories about the company's dramatic comeback. Board members smiled with relief at having avoided bankruptcy. Later that afternoon, Robert sat in his office reviewing messages from partners and employees congratulating him on the successful meeting. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. The door opened slowly, revealing a face he hadn't seen in weeks. Philip stood in the doorway, looking very different from the arrogant young man who had been escorted from the building 3 months earlier. His designer suit was replaced with simple slacks and a button-down shirt. The cocky expression was gone from his face. "Uncle Robert," Philip said hesitantly. "Do you have a minute?" Robert gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Of course." Philip sat down, clearly uncomfortable. "I watched the shareholders' meeting online." "Congratulations." "Thank you," Robert replied, studying his nephew's face. "How have you been?" Philip looked down at his hands. "Honestly, not great. The first month, I was just angry at you, at everyone. I spent a lot of time at expensive bars feeling sorry for myself." Robert nodded but said nothing. "Then my credit card started getting declined," Philip continued. "Turns out, when you're not siphoning money from a company, living in Manhattan gets pretty expensive." "I can imagine," Robert said dryly. "I had to get a real job," Philip said, as if confessing a shameful secret. "I'm working at a startup downtown. Entry-level position." Robert couldn't hide his surprise. "You're working at a regular job?" Philip nodded. "For the first time in my life, I'm earning my own money. It's not much, but," he paused, "it feels different when you earn it yourself." "Yes, it does," Robert agreed. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," Philip said. "About what I did. I was wrong, Uncle Robert. I was entitled and selfish, and I nearly destroyed my father's company." The sincerity in Philip's voice took Robert by surprise. This was not the conversation he had expected. "The thing is," Philip continued, "I never really learned the business. Dad always protected me, gave me fancy titles without expecting me to do the work. I thought I deserved everything just because of my last name." "And now?" Robert asked. Philip met his uncle's eyes directly. "Now I want to earn it. For real this time." He took a deep breath. I'm not asking for my old job back. I know I don't deserve that, but I want to learn. From the bottom up. The right way. Robert leaned back in his chair, considering his nephew's words. It won't be easy, Philip. You'd start like any other employee. No special treatment. I understand, Philip nodded. That's what I want, actually. A chance to prove myself based on my work, not my name. As Robert looked at his nephew's face, so similar to Marcus's in his younger days, he saw something new there, humility and determination. All right, Robert said finally. We'll start you in the product development department. Entry-level position. Monday morning, 8 a.m. sharp. For the first time in their relationship, Philip's smile seemed genuine. Thank you, Uncle Robert. I won't let you down this time. 6 months later, Robert walked through the halls of Keller Industries with a sense of accomplishment. Employees nodded respectfully as he passed. The company had not only recovered but was thriving again. The stock price had doubled, new projects were underway, and workplace morale had never been higher. Robert stopped by the product development department to check on their newest solar technology. In the corner of the large workspace, he spotted a familiar figure hunched over a computer, deep in concentration. Philip had kept his word. For 6 months, he had arrived early, stayed late, and worked harder than anyone else in his department. His team manager reported that Philip never mentioned his last name or asked for special treatment. He was simply known as Phil to his coworkers, many of whom had no idea he was a Keller. As Robert watched his nephew, his phone buzzed with a message from his assistant. Marcus Keller is here to see you. Robert's heart raced. He hadn't seen his brother since their confrontation at the mansion. Though Marcus had officially stepped down as CEO, giving Robert the permanent position, they had communicated only through lawyers during the transition. When Robert entered his office, Marcus was standing by the window, looking out at the city. At 72, he still had an imposing presence, though his illness had left him thinner and more fragile. The building looks different, Marcus said without turning around. You've changed things. Just a few improvements, Robert replied. The solar panels on the roof save us $500,000 in energy costs every year. Marcus nodded. Your idea from 30 years ago. It works even better than you predicted. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Finally, Marcus turned to face his brother. I know you found the files, he said. Janet told me. Robert nodded. Why didn't you ever tell me? About keeping track of me all these years? About making me your successor? Marcus sighed and lowered himself into a chair. Pride, shame. Take your pick. He looked up at Robert. I stole your ideas. I drove you away. Then I built an empire on what should have been yours. Is that why you appointed me as CEO? Guilt? Robert asked. Partly, Marcus admitted. But also because you were always better at this than me. I was good at playing the role of the billionaire businessman. You were good at actually being one. Robert sat down across from his brother. You could have called me any time in 30 years, Marcus. I know. Marcus looked down at his hands. By the time I realized what I'd done, it felt too late to fix it. Another silence fell between them, filled with 3 decades of unspoken words. How's Philip doing? Marcus finally asked. See for yourself, Robert said, leading his brother to the window of his office that overlooked the product development floor. He pointed to where Philip was now leading a small team discussion, gesturing enthusiastically at a prototype on the table. He works in product development now. Marcus asked, surprised. Started at the bottom 6 months ago. He's already been promoted twice based on merit. Robert smiled. He has good ideas. Reminds me of someone I used to know. Marcus watched his son with a mixture of surprise and pride. He looks happy. I think he is, Robert agreed. For the first time, he's earning respect rather than demanding it. Marcus turned to his brother, his eyes filling with tears. I made so many mistakes, Robert. With the company. With you. With Philip. We all did, Robert said quietly, but maybe it's not too late to fix them. Marcus held out his hand. Partners. For real this time? Robert looked at his brother's extended hand, thinking of all the years lost, all the hurt and resentment. Then he thought of the future, of the company they could build together, of the family they might still become. He took Marcus's hand and shook it firmly. Partners. That evening, The three Keller men sat together in Robert's office, planning the future of their company. Philip shared his ideas for new solar applications. Marcus offered insights on market strategy. Robert tied it all together with practical implementation plans. For the first time in 30 years, the Kellers were working together as a family, not out of obligation or entitlement, but with mutual respect and genuine appreciation for what each brought to the table. As the sun set over the city skyline, casting its golden light through the windows of Keller Industries, it illuminated 3 generations of a family that had nearly destroyed itself, but had found its way back together through honesty, hard work, and the courage to begin again.